Just to say, as we go through today's webinar, which will last for 1 hour, I'll have you out of here by 12. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. Mark them for me only. So you just go to where it says everybody, that blue box in the chat, select my name and mark them for my attention. And I will try and pick up those questions towards the end of this webinar. I have a huge amount to get through with you today, quite deliberately. I try and use these kind of forums really as a way to throw as much information as possible at people, unapologetically so, because I want you to, I don't know where your businesses are all at and where you're at and your leadership mindset and whatever else. So really my job is, I think if I throw a lot at you, you'll be able to pick out of that what is most useful to you now based on where you are. So that's the principle behind it. I want to talk today particularly about agencies. So I'm going to introduce myself properly in a second, so you have some sense of who it is that you're talking to here. But I want to talk about agency life today and what we need to do as agency businesses to survive and thrive in a world of endless change. And I've got a lot of principles and practices that I want to try and impart over the course of the next sort of 45 or so minutes. So we can go back and talk about a couple of these at the end if you've got any questions on them, but hopefully it will all make a degree of sense to you. Some of it you may be doing already actually, and it's just a sort of endorsement of that. Some of it may be completely new news, and some of it may be quite counterintuitive as well. So anyway, let's get into it. So you know who you're talking to. There is a picture of me with much shorter hair than my lockdown hair allows me to have. My name's Phil. I have spent 20 years now in my career studying organisational performance, originally just as somebody who was leading businesses, I suppose, and was interested in how we created a high-performing team within a business. And then latterly in the course of my career, I have specialised in doing that and helping other businesses to do that. And I run a business now called Corporate Punk, which is all about high performance in times of change. So I started my career actually working in Manchester agencies. So some of the names on the delegate list this morning, some of the agency names I've been familiar with for a very, very long time. I moved to London about 12 years ago to continue my career down here. And I worked across both AMV and proximity for BBDO. I've also led strategy in businesses like Rapier and Albion. And after that, I then moved off, as I say, and continue to now do this consulting work that I talked about. So Corporate Punk is all about how do you manage and prosper through change. And we work with clients, you can see some of the clients there. We work a lot with big corporates to try and get them moving a bit quicker a lot of the time. And we also work with clients, some smaller scale-up clients as well. We're quite sort of purpose-driven at Corporate Punk, and part of the purpose is to try and champion what we consider to be a really, really good quality and ethical form of consulting. So we don't do horrible land and expand style stuff. We help people genuinely solve their problems. We don't create dependency. We try and give people the tools that they need to go it alone. We're really transparent on things like price. And also we want to try and give people as much useful insight and information as we can without charging them at all. That's part of our purpose in life, is to try and help other businesses be successful. So in that spirit, last month we launched something called Recession Rebellion, which this webinar sits as part of really. It's our initiative to try and give as much useful insight, information and instruction to other businesses as we can. We've already helped over 85,000 businesses in the last 6 weeks through the writing, through webinars, through podcasts, through you name it, which I'm really, really proud of. I mean, it quite staggers me, that number. And outside of all of that, because I started my career in agencies, I maintain a real interest in agency land. I love the creative industries. It's where I started. The creative industries were inspiration for what we do at Corporate Punk. And so I work also as a mentor and advisor to a very select roster of agency businesses, always independent agencies, always owner-managed agencies, and always agencies that in working together we can achieve something we could never have achieved if we didn't. So some quite staggering results. Businesses I worked with last year, 22.4% revenue increase on average, 7.4% margin increase, and we won 4 industry awards for different innovations. So I share that with you not to be boastful, but simply to say that I feel pretty well qualified to talk on the things that I'm going to be talking to you about, both in terms of managing in times of change, but also what it is like to run an agency business. I have run agency businesses. I know it really, really well. So, and I do this as a profession. So I'm not one of those people that bought and sold a couple of businesses and thinks that gives them the right to instruct others. We are professionals at what we do at Corporate Punk. We have developed this as a practice over years and years. So the stuff that I'm talking to you about today is rock solid. So what I want to try and do over the course of the next, as I say, over the next, try and get done in about 35, 40 minutes, is really to do 3 things. Firstly is deliver the goods. So talk to you about how agencies can survive and thrive. The second thing is dig deeper. So actually try as we talk through to explain some deeper underpinning principles of why some of this stuff works, and perhaps try and give you a few other things to think about as well. So in general, you know, as I said, I'm trying to throw as much stuff as I can at you whilst answering the original question. That's the spirit of what we're trying to do here. Okay, so what is going on? I'm quite plain speaking, and I want to say from the outset that some of what I'm going to say today is going to sound relatively judgmental. It's not intended to be. Well, no, that's a lie, actually. It is intended to be. But what I'm not doing is ignoring the pain and the worry in terms of the health impacts of COVID-19 and in terms of the social impacts of COVID-19. What we are experiencing here at that level is truly appalling and distressing. And I just want to kind of pause and acknowledge that. At a business level, though, I think we're seeing some quite bad behaviour, and I actually think we're seeing some quite predictable behaviour. So when you take out the fact that we've got the health and social aspects of this pandemic going on, and you start to also take out from it there's a small number of industries that have been very deeply affected. So travel, entertainment, events, and fast food and restaurants being the obvious ones, I think. Beyond that, take those things out for a second. What we're actually looking at here is a extremely sharp recession, and whether it will be U-shaped or whether it will be V-shaped, time will tell. Personally, I think we're looking at U-shaped recession here. And actually, recessions are quite predictable, and the way that people behave in recessions is quite predictable. And we have been here before. We were here in 2008 with the credit crunch. We were here in 2001, just after the Twin Towers happened. And in a lesser way, but still quite an acute way in some categories, we were also here in the post-Brexit vote as well. So I say this because I've been quite surprised by the extent to which people have been both taken by surprise by what's happened, but also actually overtaken by what's happened. They've lost their sense of control. They've lost their sense of feeling an ability to kind of react. They've lost also to respond properly to circumstances. They're not working from within their circle of influence. They believe they have no influence at all. And so many organizations have kind of literally just sort of thrown all the cards in the air and then just sort of folded their arms while the cards fall down, you know. And many, many plans have gone on hold for strategic, operational, financial reasons. Now, if that's your business, I'm going to talk to you about why that is really, really poor leadership. Putting planning on hold is poor leadership. And there are very, very strong financial reasons why it's poor leadership. And history teaches us a lot of lessons on this. So look, it's not easy, right? Being able to plan, whether you're a client or whether you're an agency, is tough. Planning in circumstances of heightened volatility or ambiguity is even harder. Really tough to plan when things feel as up in the air. And the world has rarely felt more ambiguous or volatile. But actually, if you're not planning, particularly planning for the medium term, you're storing up significant problems. And even if you're not storing up significant problems, you're failing to capitalize on the opportunities that exist. And I want to say, absent all of the health and social impacts of COVID-19, and purely looking at it at a business level, There is massive opportunity at the moment. There is massive opportunity because there'll be fewer competitors potentially for increased market share. There is massive opportunity because entire categories are going to have to work out how to function in different ways. And there is massive opportunity for creative thinkers to help clients make sense of that world, right? So we have to have a kind of abundance mindset, not scarcity mindset. So if you're a leader at the moment who feels like you've been taken by surprise, who feels like you've had to put all your plans on hold, who doesn't think it's possible to plan for your own business, and certainly doesn't think it's possible for your clients to plan, my message to you is get your head in the game, because actually there are huge gains to be had here if we start to move with intent and with in the right ways. I'm going to talk to you about what the right ways are this morning. So let's just get into why there's opportunity here. As I said, fewer competitors, but stronger competitors when competitors act, right? This is the key thing. So, you know, the entire economy feels like it's had the kind of pause button hit on it. I mean, what was it? 20% economic contraction this year, the Bank of England was predicting this morning. So crazy, right? So you know, we've hit the pause button on the economy, and people will start to now re-engage at different rates of at different paces. So the fewer competitors, because weak ones will drop off, and ones without the balance sheet or the belief will tend to die. So the strong ones survive, and then it's down to speed at which you can get to market. So there is both a threat and an opportunity in that, right? But also, I want to talk to you about insecurity. So if that's inertia happening there, we've got people just having hit the pause button and, you know, and not a lot happening. And now I'm going to talk to you about insecurity. We'll blast through this. So this was a CEO study done last year. And again, we're talking about smaller agencies today, but I think it still holds true, certainly in terms of a lot of the organizations, big and small, that we deal with as well. So you've got a world in which people have hit the pause button. They're not making plans. You may not be making plans either. And you might want to think about making plans. And then the other sort of threat or opportunity is this. Competition may well believe it doesn't have the data to support decision making. Competition may well believe that it doesn't have the skills that it needs in order to be innovative. 55% of CEOs don't think they're able to innovate effectively. And people also think they need expensive hiring and retraining in order to be able to make sense of the new world, right? So look at the market. A market that's gone on pause, a huge amount of uncertainty, a huge amount of inertia. And when people do start thinking that they're going to move again, you've got a situation where we may not have the data we need, we may not have the skills we need, and we may need to bring in expensive hiring and retraining. So that, I think, is quite a bracing sort of set of things to look at. What it basically says to me is we have markets all over the world now where actually there is going to be a lot of inertia and there's a lot of latent insecurity. Businesses that are not inert and move from a place where they're fundamentally secure about what they do and how they do it can create colossal competitive advantage, right? So I hope that's clear. In a world where people move slow and they don't move with particularly sure footing, if we can move fast and with a sure footing, we stand a real chance of being able to get ahead and stay ahead. Inertia and insecurity can kill your business. It can kill your business. But it can also be a source of immense advantage if you can move in the opposite direction to it. And I think that's the thing that we're losing. And these media narratives about lockdowns and economic free falls and you know, and the war against the invisible enemy, all of that stuff puts people into inertia and insecurity, and it is a fundamentally disempowering state in which to exist. To feel as though you're at the mercy of a thing that you cannot see and that is plainly bigger than any human being on the planet in terms of its impact, puts you in a disempowered place with your own business. I work a lot with agency leaders who actually are quite insecure people. They suffer from imposter syndrome, all that sort of stuff. We make it go away. We deal with all of that. But it is the courage to act, and the courage to act quickly and from a place where you're grounded in your own value can give you a huge amount of competitive advantage. So in that spirit, we're going to get on. We're going to get on fast. We're going to get on well, and we're going to get on being grounded in our value. What is it we need to do? 2 really obvious and simple points. We need a strategy, right? And particularly, we need a mid-range strategy. 6 months is the planning window that we need to be working to at the moment. Any shorter than that, we're actually going to be really just in a world where we're not making a plan at all. We're just looking at an action list for a week or a month ahead. Any longer than that, it becomes too abstract and actually too hard to forecast. 6 months is about right at the moment. So we need to create a strategy. And 2, and this is the critical one, we need to make sure the organisation can deliver the strategy. Now you sit there and you're probably going, yeah, no shit, Sherlock, right? We need a strategy our organisation can deliver. What I will tell you is this. Over years and years of working with agencies, mentoring leaders, helping those agencies achieve transformative revenue breakthroughs, one of the themes that has come up time and again is entrepreneurial creative people can be fantastic at designing things that they don't actually then have the ability within their organization to deliver, right? If your organization doesn't have the goods to be able to deliver the strategy, it's not working from where it's strong, and I'm going to come on to this later, you're dooming your strategy to failure because you've basically got a plan you're not able to execute. So the art of really good planning is actually to be thinking about what we're really good at, which is our organizational competencies, and what we need to do, which is our strategy, as kind of one and the same thing, right? Or as 2 sides of the same coin. And, you know, rather than just thinking about what do our customers need and therefore what should be our strategy, and we forget the organizational competency bit, which is a problem, because then you can end up over-designing or designing something you can't deliver. So these are the 2 things we need to talk about: creating the strategy and making sure we have the organisation to deliver on the strategy. So creating strategy. Now, the principle for how we create strategy is not to worry about building the perfect plan. So I said to you, I think we need to work in 6-month timeframes here. We need to be looking to the medium term, and we need to be thinking through what's it we're going to do over the next 6 months. Now, critically, that isn't about, again, what people do in strategy generally is they go, right, here is the strategy, sort of day 1, week 1. Here is the execution, right? Week 1, month 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then if we're really lucky, we'll come and review whether or not it worked at the end. Or we'll review, but actually we're reviewing board meetings that might happen every sort of month or whatever. It doesn't really work like that. We need to be thinking about, here's the stuff we need to get done over the next 6 months, and we're going to learn through doing really fast. So we're actually building a learning organisation. We're going to just try and do a load of stuff. Think of it as spread betting, if you will. Or think of it, a friend of mine calls it blind incrementalism, which is basically a way of saying, we're just going to try a lot of stuff. We don't know what works, but through trying we'll learn. And that will help us understand then what we need to do next. So we need to think in 6-month timeframes, but we also need to be thinking about learning through doing over 6 months, not just sort of placing one bet and walking away, which is what a lot of strategy documents kind of end up almost sort of railroading people into. So how are we going to think about the next 6 months? Well, to start thinking through, what do we need to test and learn? What do we need to actually be getting out there in the market and trialing to see what, see what might work and might not? We have 7 questions, and well, the first 4 address strategy. So we call them the Magnificent 7 because if you can answer these questions and answer them extremely well, you are actually in a place where your business is almost guaranteed to thrive. They're really tough, right? So they're quite hard to answer really well, but if you can, you'll thrive. So here are the Magnificent 7. Here's the first 4 of them. Over the next 6 to 12 months, what does a victory look like? How do we expect customer wants and needs to change over that time? Why is our offering still attractive and compelling in this new reality? And how would we describe our strategy to a 10-year-old, right? So those are your first 4 strategy questions as you start to think through how are you going to survive, how are you going to thrive? Okay, so let's deal with those in turn. we're thinking through our strategy for the next 6 months. We need to be thinking through in 12 months' time, where do we want our business to be? What's our intention? What's our goal? What is it going to look like? I'm not saying that we have to sort of nail it to a point where it's so crisply defined that and it's sort of completely rock solid. But it's like in coaching, we go, well, we need to get sort of 60% of the answer and then sort of start marching in that direction. We have to have a concept of what it is we're trying to achieve. We have to have a concept for our business of what does victory actually look like. Then we have to start thinking through, okay, well, how do we expect customer wants and needs to actually change? So how do we, looking at the markets we serve, looking at our clients, looking at their markets, whatever that is, how do we expect customer wants and needs to change? Why is our offering still attractive and compelling in this new reality? So if we're actually expecting customer wants and needs to change, why is it anybody's going to buy from us, right? And how would we describe our strategy to a 10-year-old? Which is really just a way of saying, if I'm going to talk to, I always think 10-year-olds are brilliant because they'll just sort of, they cut the BS and you get kind of straight to it. So if I had to explain to a 10-year-old what it is I'm going to test and learn in the market and why, what would I say? And usually what that starts to reveal is, well, how solid is the thinking? Where are the flaws or the gaps in the thinking? What's the obvious question a 10-year-old would ask that a 41-year-old wouldn't? All that sort of stuff. So what we need to start getting a sense of here is, okay, what are our hypotheses? What are our assumptions about what the future might look like? Where do we want to take our business? How do we expect our customer wants and needs to actually change? What are our feelings about what people are going to want to buy from us, which is number 3. And number 4, how are we going to articulate in really simple terms what we're trying to do organizationally over that phase? Do you see what I mean? So what we're trying to get into is, okay, what's the shape of the future? What's our hypothesis about the shape of the future? And then that gives us the basis then to start thinking about what would we test, what do we want to test, and what do we want to learn? Okay, so those first 4 questions are tough questions, but if we don't have some sense of and some structure around our thinking, we're not going to be prospering here. So then you've got to answer those questions. So we're answering questions like, how do we expect our customer wants and needs to change over time? Well, we're going to have to test and learn, as I keep saying. So testing and learning is about planning, doing, reviewing as fast as physically possible, right? So again, one of the really interesting things I think about the last few weeks has been the pace at which it is possible to do change when circumstances dictate that you need to work at that pace. The NHS, for example, has done more on technological innovation, according to one of its chief medical officer, has done more on technological innovation in 2.5 weeks than it managed in 20 years. The NHS. I was talking to a friend of mine who works for a major high street bank the other day. He was saying to design, test, and launch a new loan product within any high street bank normally takes 6 to 9 months. The bounce back loan scheme, which was launched on Monday, it's having some teething troubles, but they've managed to do the majority of it, most of the banks, in about 6 days. So what I think is truly fascinating is all of these people that believe that change needs to take time, believe it right until the point when all the other optionality is removed. So when you actually just take change out of the equation, or take the option of having loads of time out of the equation, people can move really quite quickly. So in our business, as we start to think through what's happening to consumer need, what do we think is going to make our offering really compelling? How is these things in service of where we want to go in the longer term as an organisation? Then I would say to you, as quickly as possible is the pace at which you need to be moving. Now, that's not to say sort of self-sacrificing quickly, so we move so fast things fall over, or we don't learn the right stuff, or whatever. But it is we move as fast as we can. So in order to do that, we need to actually make sure that as we're starting to test and learn about what's working for us and what isn't, we've got proper KPI setting, measurement, tracking capabilities in place. There's no point trying to learn anything unless you've got the tools to measure. We've got to have good cultural readiness. So actually our people need to be flexible. They've got to be irreverent, which is to say, be able to question upwards. They have to know what they are empowered to do on their own, and they have to be good at taking risks. And we have to make sure that we have information and resources that are accessible to all. When I say globally, I just mean to everybody in the organisation. Those are the things we just need to build. We've got to build ways of testing and learning that allow us to measure. We've got to have a cultural readiness. We've got to have information and resources at our fingertips to be able to do it. And then we do three things. We set out what are our learning objectives. So what are we trying to learn about what customers want and need? What are we trying to learn about our business of the future? What are we trying to learn about our products and service offering, for example? And that's, and you're going to drive distinction between learning objectives and other types of objectives. So an example of that would be, I need to sell, I don't know, 4 ad campaigns over the next 6 months is fundamentally a sales objective. It's not a learning objective. A learning objective would be, I need to understand more about what kind of advertising clients are minded to buy at the moment. That would be a learning objective. Do you see what I mean? So driving distinction between those two there's different types of objectives is really, really important, or else they become all mushed and that's unhelpful. So a good learning objective is one that drives the task, project, or organization forward. So my example before, when I said, what kind of advertising or marketing do clients want to buy at the moment? That will move you forward. For example, we might see that clients are more minded to buy stuff that speaks to them having a clear social role. Or we might see them wanting to buy stuff which is less frenetic in its execution. Or we might want to see them buy stuff from a channel perspective, which is far more digital. We might actually see, bizarrely, a resurgence of outdoor advertising because actually, people want to be out and about, especially over the summer and especially after being in lockdown for 6 weeks. Don't know, right? And you probably don't either. But so the point is, we need to go out there and test, and we need to go out there and learn. Now, we need to be clear across our organisation. There's no point trying to test and learn things unless we're all agreed that this is the right thing to do. And we also have to understand that testing and learning is not the same as succeeding. So sometimes when we try things, they're going to go really wrong. And organisations can be very good at embracing failure right up until the moment that they fail, and then they actively embrace blame. So we have to be really clear that sometimes testing and learning means stuff's not going to work. And as long as we're clear on what we've learned as a result from that, we also have to be okay with it. So those are the things that really trip us up if we're not careful. Lack of clarity about our learning objectives, lack of internal agreement, and actually lack of willingness to embrace failure. Those are all tough. I don't have time to get into all the coping strategies around all that today, but those are the kind of things that will go wrong. Now then, what assumptions and hypotheses should form this work? So I gave you a few before. I gave you some about the sort of cultural resonances of advertising, and I gave you stuff before about channels, for example. There could be any number of hypotheses that you are able to map out in your own business about what you think clients needed. Now, have you got all those hypotheses and assumptions written down? Now, by an assumption, just to be clear, what I mean is the way that we think it works. So the way that clients have bought advertising, the way that clients buy direct marketing, for example, the way that a direct marketing campaign should function, all of those things become ingrained kind of knowledge, right? And it may be beneficial to get those assumptions out on the table because actually we can then challenge and we can test them, right? So what assumptions and hypotheses should inform this work? The important thing is that we're also, you can also acknowledge that you can test negatives. So what I mean by that is, it is possible to test a negative. It's possible to say, I think people don't want this, or I think this will be less profitable than that. A negative result is not a bad result if we're clear on what it is we need to learn. Yeah, you can test a negative, and then get out to market fast. How will I plan, do, and review both fast and rigorously? So 2 pizza teams, that's the Jeff Bezos thing, even at Amazon now. The principle is no team should be bigger than that which you can feed on 2 pizzas, basically. So depending on the size of appetite in your team, that's probably about 4 people, maybe, and quite tight timescales. You've also got to make sure, though, that those teams aren't allowed to kind of go off willy-nilly. You've got to have some governance around it, so making sure that they're reporting on progress and making sure that there's somebody who's outside the team who can challenge and make sure there's no groupthink going on, and also make sure that there's integrity in the activity. And then when we've learned something, we have to learn it. Now, this sounds like again, a kind of an obvious point, right? But again, working with agencies, we see this all the time, that knowledge gets banked, but only in one corner of the agency, or one individual ends up protecting it, you know, and becomes the kind of guardian of that knowledge. Or actually you find that there's teams in the business that are all working on roughly the same stuff, and actually stuff that we kind of cracked the answer to 3 or 6 months ago. We just haven't done a good enough job of communicating. So it's making sure that actually knowledge is banked and knowledge is accessible, and avoiding the temptation to repeat. So strategy-wise, what I'm saying to you here is, you know, we shouldn't be worrying about getting it all perfect. We should be worrying about getting it 60% right and then going for it, right? So that means roughly, what does victory look like? And then thinking through, okay, what do our customers want and need? What about our products and service offering? And actually, how do we make sure that we're being really rigorous in our thinking so we can explain this properly, so that actually we're testing and learning the right stuff? And to do that, we need to map out our learning objectives, map out our assumptions and hypotheses, and get to market really quickly with things that test them. To give you an example of this in action, so we did with an agency last year a service design and launch, right? So this is literally, we'd never met them before. From there, 2.5 weeks later, we had a brand new service designed and in market, so literally in market. And about a week and a half after that, £177,200 in sales were closed, right? So you can, if you're testing and learning really, really quickly and well. And by the way, that wasn't a sort of, how do I put it? It wasn't an accidental bullseye, right? What actually happened was, by day 2, we had a product proposition sorted. By day 3, we were out talking to clients. By day 5, we had feedback. By day 7, we'd iterated. By day 8, we were back out talking to clients, boom, 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 boom. The actual sort of final version of that was done in about 2.5 weeks, and then we were in sales mode. And because we'd engaged with clients in a very specific type of way, they were primed to buy. So it is totally possible to do this, which is, again, back to the point I was making before. You don't have to be this idea that we have no control at the moment, or that nobody's spending any money, or that there's just nothing that can be done. Fundamentally disempowering and total nonsense, to be honest. We sold a really big project actually just last week. So you know, there is always work to be done if we're engaging with the marketplace in the right way, the right language, the right product proposition. We're clear on what our value is and how we bring that to the market, all that sort of stuff. So that's it. Now, then I want to just sort of open up a few other questions for you as well. How are we doing on time? I've got about 10 minutes before I take some questions. Think about questions. So I'm going to give you 3 other questions on the Magnificent 7. So we talked about those 4. 5, 6, and 7 are this. Do our people have the goods to deliver our strategy? What's the main thing that could go wrong? And what makes our business capable of adapting, right? So fundamentally, if we've got our strategy starting to become a bit more solidified, if we start to understand what we want to test and learn, if we start to think about how we get out to market to test and learn that, we've got to make sure we have an organisation that's capable of doing it. And I said this earlier on, but it's so striking how often businesses will plan strategy and never think about competency, and never think about what they're actually good at, where their value is, what their heritage is, all that sort of stuff just gets lost, you know, in, we should just be doing this now. You know, if you're an agency, you can't really be moving into the sandwich making game, right? So it's kind of like, it's where are we credible? It's all those sorts of things as well that need to come into play. So I want to talk to you then about building the organisation to deliver the strategy. So the core principle here, do not commit your organisation to things it can't do or doesn't naturally excel at, okay? It is a fundamental waste of time in life to try and become brilliant at something that you are innately weak at, right? So I am notoriously terrible at figures, awful. Can't get my head around it. I'm also even worse at project management. It's an absolute weakness of mine. There is no point in me whatsoever trying to become a brilliant project manager or a brilliant finance manager, for example, because all that's going to happen is I'm going to get frustrated, I'm going to tire myself out, I'm not actually bringing to the world what I am really good at, and in the end, even if I got really good at it, I would still not be quite as good as other people who are naturally good at it. Do you see what I mean? It's a total waste of time. Neutralize your weaknesses and work from where you're strong. So in this context, as we're starting to think through what does our 6-month plan look like, actually, we can be thinking through, okay, well, where are we as a business, as an agency business, where are we, what's our best day? right? What's the stuff that we're really good at and better than most other people at? Now, I am not talking here about agency proposition. Hate agency proposition work. I think it's a massive waste of time. Every agency I advise is say, let's not spend any time worrying about your proposition. Let's worry much more about your products and service stack, and let's make sure that it's really clear on what your core value actually is. Whether you help brands keep their promises or whatever doesn't help you sell a yacht, right? No one cares about that stuff. And oftentimes what it is a bit of wallpaper, a bit of kind of like language that sits across the top, everybody feels notionally quite good about, but actually it's not even been really thought through properly, and there's not a real grounding in the business about what the actual value the business is offering to the marketplace is. So what we need to go to is not an agency proposition, it's where are we actually really strong? Where's the unique value we bring to clients? And how do we make sure that we are developing strategy, working on things that we're really good at? Because when you're doing stuff you're really good at, you feel energized, you feel you feel focused, you'll feel actually confident as well in your ability to bring that kind of value to clients. So I would say to you a really useful exercise, because having a conversation about what you're good at, can be okay in the abstract. And actually most of us, to be honest, you don't need instructions from me about how to have a conversation about what you're good at, right? That's just a conversation. You just need to acknowledge the need to have it and then have it. What I do think is interesting though, is a sort of deeper examination of competencies through the level of behavior, and systems and processes, that kind of thing. Because sometimes what we're good at a surface level might be, well, we're great at design, right? Or we're great at strategic problem solving. We're great at client relationship management, all that stuff. You don't need to have that conversation. But what might kill your project is what you are good at or not good at from a system, structure, process, behavior standpoint, right? So a good way of getting to that is to do this thing called a pre-mortem. So as you start to think through your strategy for the next 6 months, you might want to go, okay, well, hang on a second. Let's before we just press and go on doing all this test and learn, let's have a conversation about what happens if it all goes wrong, right? So what you do is you imagine you're 6 months down the line and you're in your board meeting and you haven't really got anything to say because everything that you've tested and learned, you've not really learned anything from. None of it worked at the level of it didn't work in terms of driving money in, but also actually, as I say, you didn't learn anything. And you are feeling dreadful about it and the numbers look terrible and it's just been an awful 6 months. That's the mindset we're going to be in. And then we're going to go, right, what happened? So how did this die? What killed it? What will be said on its tombstone? What's our biggest regret? And critically, what should we have done to save it, right? So I'm looking at my 6-month plan, all my tests and learns, and I go, how did it die? It died because every time we've tried to manage more than one work stream like this at once, we've always ended up dropping a ball. What killed it was a lack of project management expertise in the business. What we said on its tombstone is, there goes another one. And the biggest regret is, we've talked so many times about the fact we've needed a really good project management lead on this, and we never do it. And actually, therefore, what we need to do now is bite the bullet and get somebody in who can do that. Do you see what I mean? So it's like, how do we get into? And sometimes what kills it also are things like we tend to lose heart in our new initiatives about 3 weeks in. We're classic launch and leavers, you know? You do see that sort of behaviour all the time as well. So it can be any number of things, and all businesses are different in this regard. But the important thing is, you know, let's get into those questions because it will reveal uncomfortable truths about what is going to derail us. And it will reveal uncomfortable truths about how the organisation functions. I can tell you this, every failure in an organisation is a failure of people to have the right conversation early enough in the process that they're going through, right? So start with the pre-mortem. It has a lot to teach you. And then what we need to be striving towards, if we really want to thrive through endless change, we need to be building an adaptive organisation. The process of building an adaptive organisation it can take a very, very long time to get this right. But ultimately, what you need is an organisation which is able to bend and flex and flow around obstacles, right? An organisation that's capable of testing, learning, adjusting, moving forward. An organisation which is more like a bamboo, bamboo, so it sort of bends in the wind and then snaps back, rather than like an oak, which just sort of stands there unmoving and then eventually gets toppled by a big storm. Got to start thinking through, what does it mean to be properly adaptive? And there is a formula to building an adaptive organisation. I don't have a lot of time on this, so I'll just give you a sense of it. The most important thing is that an adaptive organisation is founded on awareness of itself. I've been quite distressed over the last few weeks by the number of businesses that have given themselves away, quite frankly, over this COVID-19 crisis. They've sacrificed their self-identity. They've taken a values bypass. Everything that they said they cared about, they actually proved that they didn't care about at all. They've been a good business historically, and then suddenly hit by this, they've started behaving like a really bad business, all that sort of stuff. You cannot manage change effectively without a strong sense of self-identity and a strong grounding in your own value. You need to know who you are. You need to know what your purpose is for your clients, for the people that work with you. And again, I'm not talking about some wanky statement of vision. I'm talking about, we have a really crystal clear sense of who we are and what our value is in the world. Values alignment. We have standards of behaviour that are understood and embraced. And vision buy-in. We're clear on what we're trying to achieve here. Everybody's bought into the organisation's long-term goals. So we can talk about being adaptive. We can talk about flexing and bending around circumstances and being able to test and learn quickly and be really productive and all that kind of thing. But unless we have a rock-solid sense of self-identity, like a steel core in the middle, all that happens is we get literally knocked about all over the place. The next one is agility. So when we've done all that, can we actually listen? So sensitivity is part of agility. Can we listen to what's going on in the market and actually listen really to what it's saying to us? Agencies particularly, I've got to tell you this, and you may not agree with me, you may not like it. In my experience, agencies can be really, really bad at picking up on the signals that clients are sending to them. And sometimes those signals are really positive signals, which is, you just need to give us a little bit more time. It's actually a positive signal, but an agency can often move much quicker than a client can. Or actually, when clients are talking about changes to the structure of their budget, what actually are the signals that are going on in those conversations? So we've got to be able to be really sensitive. Also sensitive to what consumers want. Because bear in mind, we're a kind of B2B2C thing, right? So we're selling to other businesses that are then usually selling on to consumers or customers of some description. So it's like, what change signals are going on out there? Can we hear all that stuff? A lot of agency businesses can end up being really kind of like myopic, right? Which is to say, they're sort of focused on their own, the running of their own business. They're not actually listening to what's going on in the world. When we've done that, can we have intelligent conversations with each other about what it means? And can we have difficult conversations? We all know that creativity requires dissent. A creative process requires a conversation which is about disagreement, active disagreement sometimes, but being able to reconcile that quickly and for the best. And that's what conversational intelligence is about. And then can we make decisions fast? Now, looking across those two things, it may be you're really strong in some areas and a bit weaker in others. It might be that actually you're really good at knowing who you are. You've got great values. You live by those values even when time gets tough, and your people are pretty well aligned, right? But you're just not always that great at perceiving what's going on out there. Or it could be that actually you're overly sensitive to what's going on in the market, but then very quickly sacrifice your self-identity in order to be able to meet the demands of that market. And so it's a balancing act across all of this stuff. And then finally, the actual core of it's about adaptability. Can our talent go to where it needs to go in order to be useful? And do we have enough battery life to be able to do the testing and the learning? And this battery life works at two levels. It's leadership and it's team. So, I can sound really, really unsympathetic sometimes. I know when I talk. My job, I see it sometimes, is to help leaders to see the things that they don't want to see in order that their business actually prospers. So there's a kind of a tough love element to it, I suppose, in lots of respects. But I do know how tough it is. I'm a leader of a business myself, and I've been a leader of agency businesses in the past, and it's tiring. It's extraordinarily draining sometimes to be able to do that. And, we can feel jolted by circumstance, or we can feel ground down by the challenges of cash management and people management. And, it's not always realistic to expect teams to have an understanding of the pressures that are on us as leaders. So looking after our own energy levels, our own kind of battery life is so critical, because when things come along, this is a marathon, not a sprint. When things happen, we need to be resilient, we need to be resourceful. And if we're in a good place, we also need our teams to be in a good place as well. And teams also can get jolted. Furloughing jolts people, right? Because basically what's going on with furloughing is it's sending a very strong message about who has utility and who doesn't have utility at the moment. So we need to make sure that we've got a team that's energetically ready to deliver what is being asked of it, as well as a competency level being able to deliver what is being asked of it. And those things are really, really important. So we've got to think really carefully about our own energy levels and our own flexibility. Awareness, agility, and adaptability are things we need to focus on organisationally in order to be able to deliver in the longer term the strategy that we've set out. So that's basically all I wanted to talk to you about today, which is quite a lot, I know. But inertia is not a strategy. Doing nothing is not a strategy. Sitting there feeling insecure is not actually helpful. It's fundamentally disempowering to you. But knowing that others are in that state, and they are in that state, good Lord, we're seeing a lot of that at the moment, it can be a huge advantage to you. Strategy is essential. We need to have a solid 6-month strategic plan. Agencies also need to make sure they've got the goods to deliver on it. We need to make sure that the Magnificent 7 can be our guide, right? So the Magnificent 7, those 7 questions that I mapped out for you, are a great guide to, are we thinking about the right things at the moment? Answering them well might take you 12 months, particularly given the unknowns and the variables that there are out there in the world. It can take you 12 months. But they're a great kind of like sort of map, if you will, to making sure that we're asking the right questions at all times of the businesses that we lead. You strategize over 6 months by embracing that learning organization ethos. Try, do, plan, do, review as quickly as you can, as rigorously as you can. Keep the team small, keep the focus, keep them agile. Make sure that you've really caught and had an honest forensic conversation about what you are likely to drop the ball on. It might be a competency, which is to say we're just not terribly good at that kind of work. Or it actually might be a behavior or a process or something structural. Don't know, can't speak for your businesses. It may be a combination of all of those. Doing that pre-mortem really helps. But also thinking through all the time those critical points about adaptability. Are we listening to the market in the right way? Are we able to have difficult conversations about what it's telling us? And do we balance that out with a rock solid sense of who we are at the core? And we keep that rock solid sense of who we are at the core. And then also we can make sure that we're nice and fluid and adaptable while keeping our energy levels high. Those are the things we need to be thinking about. But I suppose more than anything else, I just very passionately at the moment, particularly about, fellow creative industry people, that it can feel really tough and really unforgiving. It's not an easy market anyway. Anybody who's running a creative industry business, you have my undying sort of love and respect, because I know how hard it is. And it can be really, really tough to get out there and sell this kind of work. Because we're selling ideas and we're selling things that the education system doesn't venerate, and a whole lot of other stuff I can rant on about and don't have the time for. But I tell you now, the ability to solve difficult problems in original ways is going to be higher in demand than ever before. The value you've got to bring to the world is in higher demand than it ever has seen before. It may not feel like it, but actually what you need is great strategists and great creative thinkers at times of great uncertainty. So hold the line and get on with it, get your head in the game, and I'm sure it'll be okay. So I'm going to finish there, and I'm going to take a couple of questions for the last 10 minutes of this. So, Okay, perfect. So talking about the Bank of England, we have a question here. So the economy is expected to contract by 14% this year and rebound by 15% next. I think that the rebounding is a little bit optimistic, but anyway. How do we convince clients that severely cutting marketing budget this year will hinder their recovery next year? Well, A great question, that. So what do I think about that? I think that we have to be thinking through the kind of, well, I think two things. Firstly, I would pose a challenge, which is what kind of clients are we actually attracting? So are we wanting to work with leaders, with brilliant businesses, with people who do think imaginatively, and with people who will push us creatively and strategically? Or do we want to be working with laggards, right? If we have an entire client portfolio full of people who are in fear and inertia, when they have a choice to be another way, that's the critical thing. If you're in travel at the moment, for example, it can be really, really tough because there's just not much of it going on. But there's a load of industries that have choices. I would ask, in the longer term, are those the right clients? Because we want to be working with people who are innovative and people who lean into challenges and people who will challenge themselves and challenge others. And it's always the problem in any recession: if marketing budget gets cut, it's actually the last thing that should be cut. I think then accepting that not everybody can work with those sorts of clients, and there's money to be made elsewhere. If you've got a client who's talking about wanting to cut budgets, I would say, what does history have to teach us, right? So we can be really present and future focused, particularly in entrepreneurial businesses, and we don't do a terribly good job of looking at history. I think a little bit of time spent studying the past, studying the behavior of organizations in previous recessions, and also how different categories, or industry types, to put it a different way, have rebounded from recessions, and what behavior from what businesses succeeded and what behavior from what businesses failed, is time that is really, really well spent. And most of us have a good working knowledge about a lot of the categories that we serve, and we just don't leverage it very, very well. So I think without browbeating clients, which, let's be honest, nobody wants, even at the best of times, without browbeating clients, I think it is a job of going, history, there's no new thing under the sun. History is a great teacher. So what can we learn from the past? And the other thing as well is, perhaps it's not a conversation which is about, we had £1 million budget, we now have 200 grand budget. Perhaps the conversation isn't getting back up to the million. Perhaps the conversation you really want to be having with your clients is the conversation that we've been having today, which is, okay, given all of these unknowables, why don't we forget trying to do our usual annual strategic planning process? Instead, why don't we spend 3 to 6 months working together, testing and learning as much stuff as we possibly can, so that at the time that your budget does become more freed up, that we're clear on what we need to do, or actually we can build a case with you to get your budget back up. Because a lot of the time, marketing directors don't like the fact that budgets have been cut either, right? So to try and summarize all of that, point one, think carefully about the clients you've got. I think there are plenty of clients out there that will think very inventively at times like this. Two, I think there is a conversation that says, what can we learn from history? And three, I think there is also a discussion which is, how can we be testing and learning as a way to both experiment our way to a viable future strategy and also get budget back up. So someone else asks, well, we have half the team furloughed. It feels like we're just in survival mode. How do we plan around that? So we don't know when, if they'll come back, and the current team are stretched to capacity. Well, it's a slightly ambiguous question, to be honest, but plan around the fact we don't know when they're going to come back. Well, I think, again, I would say to you that the idea of one plan is probably the thing that may need challenging there. So if you're wondering about, well, I don't know when people are going to be able to come back off furlough, I don't know what the world's going to look like when they come back off furlough, I would say don't write one plan, write three. And maybe plan number one you write is, Rishi Sunak announces that at the end of June, everybody has to come back off furlough, and yet there is not much activity still going on in the market. What would we do then? Plan number two would be, actually, we're going to end up in a slightly different furlough position, which is that maybe the government will allow, less furloughing to take place, but on a slightly more flexible basis. There was something written about that by Niles Pratley in the business section of The Guardian yesterday, which is well worth a read. That we might only get fewer wages paid, or actually we might be only able to furlough a certain proportion of our team, but actually we can do so on a much more flexible basis and rotate in, rotate out. and then maybe scenario number 3 is actually everyone remains furloughed until the back end of the summer. Do you see what I mean? Now, I can't speak for the specifics in your business or your category, but you see what I'm saying. I think you have to plan to scenarios, explore each of those scenarios and go, okay, well, what would it take for us to survive and thrive in that scenario? Now, being on furlough is tougher for people a lot of the time than we think. It's really hard. It can be very, very draining experience to be on furlough. You feel as though you maybe don't have a huge amount of utility, So I think there could be an argument that says, against each of those scenarios also, where is the stretch around the edges? So could we perhaps bring 1 or 2 people back sooner so that we have a bit more capacity within the team, particularly capacity to do some of this kind of work that I've been talking to you about today? So I think you can go through the scenarios, you can start to look at the financial implications of them, and you can start to debate where the sort of strategic slack is in each of them, so that you can then work through, okay, well, in this situation we do this, in this situation we do that. It's the kind of thing we're helping clients with at the moment a lot, actually, is let's just spend an hour or 2 on the phone together, hashing through actually what some different scenarios would look like and how we would cope with that. Final comment on this one is you have to be in a position where and this is really tough financially, or can be really tough financially, so I'm not saying this glibly. It is about freeing up the time to try and not just do the urgent, but also do the important. It's about making sure we have enough capacity in our team in order to be able to think through those magnificent 7 questions, plan some test and learn stuff, think through future propositions, think through what the business might look like in 12 months, all of that sort of stuff. And, that goes to, do we have enough bandwidth in the team? It also goes to, are there things that we're doing that we shouldn't be doing? Are there ways that we can be more efficient? We've got to carve out some time, because otherwise what we're doing is we're playing a game of treading water, which, don't forget, if you're treading water in a current, it's quite a tiring thing to do anyway, and we're not actually swimming in any particular direction. And in the end, that we've got to have the energy to be able to do that, or else, for all the reasons I talked about earlier on, circumstances might still yet overtake us. So I have every sympathy. It's a really, really difficult situation, but I think we've got to look at multiple scenarios. Where are the stretch in those scenarios? What are the financial implications of those stretches? And ultimately then, how do we make sure we're carving out the time not to just do the urgent, but to do the important? So that's all we have time for today. I want to just say thank you for listening to me. I hope it's been of some use to you over the last hour. I'm conscious I've thrown a lot in there. We are doing complimentary 30-minute calls if you want to spend a bit of time kicking around with me or one of my team, any of the issues that we've talked about today, and perhaps explore, if some support would be useful to you. We can do that. Just email us at fightback@corporatepunk.com. In the meantime, have a gander at Twitter, LinkedIn, and our website, which you'll see there. Always welcome people connecting if they are interested in the kind of content we put out. We're a very content-heavy organisation. We do a lot of writing. You'll see a lot of stuff up on LinkedIn, lots of free advice. If you go to corporatepunk.com, you'll also see a link to our Recession Rebellion initiative. There are, I think, now 22 different webinars available on Recession Rebellion on all sorts of different subjects, some of which I've touched on today. Some of that might be a useful resource for you and your agencies as well. That's all completely free. So have a look and stalk us a bit online, but if you want one of those 30-minute calls, you can book in. If you email fightback@corporatepunk.com, we'll send you a link to book in. And I just want to say to you, thank you very much, and I wish you all the very best over the coming weeks and months. And it's been a real pleasure talking to you today. And also, I should say, thank you very much to Creative Resource also for asking me to come and do this. I've known Julie and Phil since I was, knee-high to a grasshopper. And I rate and respect not only the ethics with which they do recruitment very highly, but also the extraordinary efforts that they go to try and add value to the industry that they serve, which I see no other recruiter doing. So thank you very much to you, Julie and Phil, as well. And I will hopefully speak to some of you again soon. All the best.